The hardest thing about being the invisible engine of a multi-million-dollar company is that when everything works perfectly, everyone praises the person steering while nobody remembers who built the actual machine. "I'm done watching you leech off my wife's success," Brandon said, throwing a cardboard box onto the mahogany desk I'd worked at for 10 years. My sister, Helena, stood by the window staring at her own reflection, completely silent. She didn't look at me when her husband, a man who'd only joined our family 3 months earlier, told me I had exactly 1 hour to clear out of the building I had personally built from a garage startup into a thriving empire worth millions. "I don't have any savings, Brandon," I whispered, my voice cracking with emotion I couldn't hide. "Everything I ever earned went straight back into growing this company. I live in the guest house behind Helena's place. I literally have nothing else." Brandon actually laughed at that, a cold sound that made my stomach twist. "Then I guess it's time for you to find what I'd call a real job instead of riding Helena's coattails like a parasite," he said, crossing his arms. "Get out of this building. No severance package, no handouts, no mercy for freeloaders. You have 55 minutes left." My sister still didn't turn around from that window. My name is Julian, and for 10 years I had been what people called the workhorse of Cascade Logistics. Helena was always the face of the company, the one who smiled for cameras and shook hands at networking events. She had natural charisma that drew people in and made them trust our business. But I was the one who handled everything else, the client relationships that kept them coming back, the technical systems that made our operations run smoothly, the logistics planning that solved impossible delivery problems, even the patents we held on our tracking software. I didn't mind staying in the shadows and letting Helena take the credit. I loved my sister, and I genuinely thought family was supposed to be a lifetime contract you couldn't break. Brandon saw our company as a goldmine he could control, and he wanted me completely out of the way so he could claim everything for himself. The day I got kicked out, I didn't just lose my job. I lost my home too, since I'd been living in the guest house on Helena's property. I walked out into the pouring rain that afternoon with exactly $42 in my wallet and a laptop computer with a badly cracked screen. I had no car because I'd always just borrowed Helena's spare vehicle. I had no apartment because why would I need one when family was supposed to take care of family? I stood on the sidewalk getting soaked, watching the building I'd built, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my entire life. But Brandon made a critical mistake that day, one that would eventually destroy everything he was trying to steal. He didn't just fire me from Cascade Logistics. Over the next 2 weeks, he also fired what he called the old guard, the floor managers who'd been with us since year 2, the lead software developers who'd built our custom systems, the head of sales who knew every major client personally, and the operations director who could solve any crisis. He called them all loyalists to a leech, meaning me. He thought he could replace 10 years of knowledge and relationships with cheaper college graduates who wouldn't question his vision or push back on his terrible ideas. I spent my first month sleeping on my friend Andre's couch in his tiny apartment across town. Andre and I had gone to college together, and he didn't ask questions when I showed up with nothing but a garbage bag full of clothes and my broken laptop. I spent those weeks staring at a whiteboard I'd bought from a dollar store, mapping out possibilities and plans. I wasn't sitting at a drawing board planning my next venture. I was sitting at what I thought of as a war table, planning how to survive and eventually fight back. I had no money, no resources, and no clear path forward. But I had something Brandon would never understand. I had knowledge, relationships, and a reputation for actually getting things done. I didn't have to reach out to my old staff from Cascade Logistics. They started calling me instead one by one over those first few weeks. "He's completely ruining everything, Julian," they told me during quiet phone conversations. "The clients are leaving because Brandon doesn't understand their needs. The systems are crashing because he fired the people who maintained them. The new college kids are lost and have no idea what they're doing. Please, you have to do something. Lead us again." Each conversation felt like a small piece of hope growing in my chest. Maybe I wasn't as powerless as I felt. Maybe I could build something new from these ashes. I started putting together a plan for a new company. I called it Summit Solutions, and at first it existed only on paper and in my imagination. We didn't have a fancy office with mahogany furniture or floor-to-ceiling windows. We worked out of a rented warehouse space on the industrial side of town, sitting on folding chairs around cheap tables we'd bought secondhand. The floor was concrete, the heating barely worked in winter, and we shared one bathroom with the machine shop next door. But we had something Brandon couldn't buy with all of Helena's money. We had trust. Our old clients from Cascade didn't actually care about Helena's brand or her pretty smile. They cared about getting their shipments delivered on time, and they knew I was the person who'd always made that happen. Building Summit Solutions from nothing was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. We started with just 5 people, me and 4 of the managers Brandon had fired. We pooled what little money we had saved, took out small business loans, and worked 18-hour days 7 days a week. Our first office was freezing cold because we couldn't afford to run the heat at a comfortable temperature. We ate cheap ramen noodles and gas station sandwiches for most meals. I slept on an air mattress in the corner of the warehouse for the first 6 months to save money on rent. But slowly, carefully, we started winning back clients. The first one who switched from Cascade to Summit was a manufacturing company we'd worked with for 8 years. Their CEO called me personally and said, "We don't care about the name on the building, Julian. We care about results, and you've always delivered." Over the next year, something amazing started happening. Every time Brandon's streamlined systems failed at Cascade Logistics, which happened often because he'd fired everyone who knew how to fix problems, I was there with Summit Solutions offering a working alternative. Every time he insulted a long-term partner or client with his arrogant attitude, which also happened often, I was there with a handshake and a contract. Word spread quickly in our industry that the real talent from Cascade had moved to Summit. Brandon had the fancy building and the expensive equipment, but we had the knowledge and the relationships. And in the logistics business, relationships are everything. Clients started switching to us in larger and larger numbers. By the end of year 2, Summit Solutions had grown from 5 people in a warehouse to 35 people in an actual office building. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, paid for with money we'd actually earned through hard work. We'd taken about 40% of Cascade's client base, all the most profitable and loyal accounts. I hired back every single person Brandon had fired, offering them better salaries and actual respect. We celebrated every small victory, landing a new contract, solving a difficult logistics problem, getting a thank you note from a satisfied client. The team felt like a real family, the kind where people actually supported each other instead of stabbing each other in the back for personal gain. It felt good to build something based on trust instead of ego. Meanwhile, I heard through industry contacts that Cascade Logistics was struggling badly. Brandon had made decision after decision that destroyed what Helena and I had built over a decade. He changed their pricing structure to undercut competitors, but he'd miscalculated costs and was losing money on every contract. He'd invested heavily in expensive automated systems that didn't actually work properly and kept breaking down. He'd alienated so many clients with his rude attitude that people were actively warning others not to work with Cascade. Helena rarely appeared at industry events anymore, and when she did, she looked tired and stressed. I felt a complicated mix of emotions seeing her struggle, part satisfaction, part sadness and part anger that she'd let this happen by choosing her husband over her brother. Year 3 brought massive growth for Summit Solutions. We expanded into 3 new cities, opened regional offices and hired over 100 employees. Our revenue was climbing steadily month after month. I moved out of my friend Andre's apartment and bought a small house, nothing fancy, but it was mine and I'd earned it honestly. We landed several major contracts with national retailers who'd heard about our reputation for reliability. Industry magazines started writing articles about Summit as an up-and-coming logistics company to watch. I did a few interviews, always making sure to credit my amazing team for our success. I never mentioned Cascade or Helena or Brandon by name, but people in the industry knew the history. They knew I'd been thrown out and had built something better from nothing. By year 4, the situation had completely reversed. Summit Solutions was thriving while Cascade Logistics was actively dying. I heard from former Cascade employees who'd stayed behind that Brandon had started selling off company assets to fund a luxury lifestyle he and Helena couldn't actually afford. He'd sold 2 of their delivery trucks, then their backup warehouse, then some of the patents I'd originally developed. He was burning through cash trying to maintain appearances, while the actual business crumbled underneath him. The multi-million-dollar company that Helena and I had built together was now drowning in multi-million-dollar debt. The leach, as Brandon had called me, had become what I thought of as the apex predator in our industry. Year 5 started with Summit Solutions signing the biggest contract in our company's history, a 10-year partnership with a major shipping corporation. We celebrated with a real party at a nice restaurant, the whole team together, laughing and proud of what we'd accomplished. I'd moved into a beautiful corner office with glass walls, modern furniture, and a view of the city skyline. It wasn't mahogany and it wasn't built on stolen dreams, which made it better than anything at Cascade. My assistant was a sharp young woman named Kara who kept everything organized and running smoothly. I trusted her completely, which is why I believed her when she came into my office one Tuesday afternoon looking uncomfortable and said there was a woman in the lobby asking to see me without an appointment. She says she's your sister, Kara said quietly. She looks upset. Should I tell her you're busy? My heart started pounding hard in my chest. I hadn't spoken to Helena in 5 years, not since the day Brandon threw me out. No, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Send her up. I stood by the window while I waited, the same way Helena had stood by the window that terrible day and wondered what she could possibly want after all this time. When she walked into my office a few minutes later, I barely recognized her. She looked at least 10 years older than she should have. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by plain discount store outfits. Her hair needed cutting and her face looked exhausted and desperate. Julian, she said, her voice shaking as she sat down in the chair across from my desk. She didn't wait for me to invite her to sit. The bank is foreclosing on everything. The building, the equipment, even our house. We're going to lose it all in 30 days if we can't come up with money. Brandon said we should ask you for an investment or maybe a loan, just $500,000 to keep the lights on and pay the most urgent debts. Please. She was actually begging me, the sister who'd stood silent while her husband destroyed my life. I looked at her for a long moment, feeling absolutely nothing except maybe a distant sadness for what we used to be. Is Brandon? I asked, keeping my voice neutral and professional. Why didn't he come with you to ask for this money? Helena looked down at her hands, fidgeting with her wedding ring. He's waiting in the car downstairs, she admitted quietly. He was too embarrassed to come up and face you after everything that happened. I almost laughed at that. Too embarrassed. The man who'd called me a leech and a parasite, who'd thrown me into the street with nothing, was too embarrassed to ask for help. He didn't want me to leech off your success 5 years ago, Helena, I said, leaning forward. So why are you trying to leech off mine now? I didn't build Summit for you or to save you. I built it because you stood by that window and watched him throw me away like garbage and did absolutely nothing to stop it. Helena started crying, tears running down her face as she tried to explain. I was scared, Julian. Brandon was so confident and he said he knew better than you about running a business. He said you were holding us back and we'd be better off without you. I believed him because I loved him and I wanted to trust my husband. I was wrong. I was so wrong about everything. Please, you're my brother, we're family. Doesn't that mean anything anymore? I thought about that word. Family and what it had meant to me 5 years ago versus what it meant now. Family is supposed to be a lifetime contract, I said quietly. You broke that contract when you chose him over me. I begged you for help that day and you gave me silence. I didn't give Helena the loan she was asking for. I explained to her that giving Cascade Logistics $500,000 would be like pouring water into a glass that had already shattered into 1,000 pieces. The money would disappear into the debt, nothing would actually get fixed, and they'd be back begging for more within a few months. The company is already dead, I told her, not trying to be cruel but just stating facts. Brandon killed it with his arrogance and his terrible decisions. No amount of money will bring it back to life. She left my office crying, and I watched her walk to the elevator with slumped shoulders. I felt bad for about 5 minutes, then I went back to work because Summit had actual clients who depended on us. 6 weeks later, Cascade Logistics officially filed for bankruptcy. The announcement made the local business news, with articles talking about the dramatic fall of a once successful company. The bankruptcy court scheduled an auction to sell off all the company's remaining assets, the building, the equipment, the client lists, the patents, even the company name itself. Everything would be sold to the highest bidder to pay back creditors. I had Kara mark the auction date on my calendar in red. I'd been waiting 5 years for this moment, and I wasn't going to miss it. I spent the week before the auction reviewing all the asset listings carefully, deciding exactly what I wanted to buy and how much I was willing to pay. The auction was held on a rainy Thursday morning in a bland government building downtown. There weren't many people there since Cascade's reputation was so damaged that most investors weren't interested. I sat in the back row wearing a simple suit, waiting patiently while the auctioneer worked through smaller items first. Office furniture went for almost nothing. Computer equipment sold for pennies compared to what it had cost new. Then they got to the big items. The building itself, the remaining delivery trucks, the client database, and most importantly, the patents for the logistics software I'd originally developed. I bid on everything that mattered, and because there was almost no competition, I won every single lot for a fraction of what they were actually worth. When the auction ended, I'd spent about $800,000 to buy the entire shell of what used to be Cascade Logistics. The building where Brandon had thrown me out, the patents I'd created, the name Helena and I had built together, all of it now belonged to Summit Solutions. I walked back into that mahogany office for the first time in 5 years, standing in the empty room and remembering that terrible day. But I didn't keep the office as my own or turn it into some kind of trophy. Instead, I had it completely renovated and turned into a comfortable break room for Summit employees. The expensive mahogany desk became a ping-pong table. The fancy chairs became comfortable couches. The place where Brandon had called me a leech became a place where hard-working people could relax and feel appreciated. Helena and Brandon lost everything in the bankruptcy. They had to move into a small rental apartment in a cheaper part of town, selling most of their possessions to pay personal debts. Brandon eventually found work as a mid-level sales associate at an office supply company, the kind of job where he's the one being told what to do instead of giving orders. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, he hates every minute of it but can't afford to quit. Helena started calling me again a few months after the auction, leaving voicemails asking if we could talk, if we could try to rebuild our relationship. I listened to the messages, but I only called her back when it was about actual family things like our parents' birthdays, never about business or money. 5 years after Brandon threw a cardboard box on my desk and called me a leech, I'm sitting in my glass office at Summit Solutions watching the sun set over the city. We employ over 300 people now across 6 states. Our revenue last year was higher than Cascade's best year ever. I own the building where my sister and I started our dream, but I filled it with people who actually deserve success. I learned the hardest possible lesson about family and business. You can't fire the person who built the house and expect the roof to stay standing. Brandon thought he could take everything I'd created and claim it as his own just by removing me from the picture. He was wrong. The invisible engine was actually the whole machine, and without it, everything stopped working. I didn't get revenge. I just let the natural results of his choices play out while I built something better. And somehow, that feels more satisfying than any revenge could ever be. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe and tell us what you think in the comments. Check out some more of our stories.